I won't leave you. She whispered it through a crack in the floorboards to a child she had never met, a 7-year-old boy tied to a chair in an abandoned cabin deep in the Tennessee mountains, while the man who took him paced 10 feet above her head with a knife on his belt and 48 hours of rage in his eyes. Grace Holloway had no weapon, no phone signal, no backup. She had a nurse's bag, a promise, and the terrifying understanding that if she moved wrong just once, that little boy would not survive the night. Subscribe right now. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Stay with me every second of this matters. Tell Lucas I have his son. If he calls the police, he'll find Noah in pieces. Tell him Ethan says hello. Those words spoken into a cheap prepaid phone in the dark of an abandoned Tennessee hunting cabin changed everything. Not just for a 7-year-old boy named Noah, who sat 3 feet away, gripping a worn stuffed fox like it was the last solid thing in the world. Not just for his father, Lucas Callahan, who would receive that message like a bullet to the chest, but for Grace Holloway, a woman crouched in the dirt and cold beneath the floorboards of that cabin, pressing her ear to the ground, listening to every word. Those 12 sentences became the moment her life split cleanly into before and after. She had not planned any of this. She had planned to drive home, change her mother's bandage, take 3 ibuprofen, and sleep until her body stopped hurting. That was the plan, a Tuesday night plan, a tired, ordinary, invisible woman's plan. Instead, she was here. It had started 40 minutes earlier on a mountain road outside Gatlinburg at 11:17 p.m., and with her headlights catching a shape in the dark. Grace had been awake for nearly 20 hours. 14 of those hours were spent in the emergency room. 43 patients, 2 cardiac arrests, 1 5-year-old with a shattered arm who screamed for his mother with such raw animal desperation that Grace could still hear it 3 hours later. Her left shoulder ached from lifting. Her eyes burned. Her gas tank was low. Her phone battery was at 8%. She was 7 miles from home when it happened. Her headlights swept across a man running hard along the road's edge. Not jogging, not walking fast. Running the way people run when something is chasing them, or when they are the thing doing the chasing. He was carrying a child, not the way a father carries a sleeping son, draped soft across the shoulder, one hand cupping the small head. The way he carried this boy was different. The arms were locked. The grip was controlled. The child hung limp and loose, one sneaker on one sneaker, gone small pajama legs swinging with each of the man's strides. Grace's foot hit the brake before her brain finished the sentence. The man never looked at her headlights. He ran straight into the tree line and vanished. For a moment, Grace just sat there, hands on the wheel, engine running, the road empty in both directions. Nothing but mountain dark in front of her and the soft tick of her cooling engine. Then she grabbed her phone. No signal, not one bar. She already knew she always lost signal on this stretch, but she checked twice because she needed permission from the universe to drive away. She needed the phone to give her an excuse. The phone gave her nothing. She looked at the tree line. She looked at the empty road. She did the math in her head. Drive until signal call, 911, wait for dispatch. Wait for units to respond to an unmarked mountain location with 0 landmarks. And no description except a man ran into the woods, and she understood with the same cold clarity she used to assess critical patients that by the time anyone official reached this spot, that child's odds were not good. Grace turned off her headlights. She grabbed her nurse's bag. She stepped out of the car and into the cold. She told herself it was insane. She told herself she was exhausted and unarmed and alone, and that this was exactly the kind of decision that ended careers and lives. She told herself all of it, and she followed them anyway. Her father had taught her to track in these same mountains on weekends she had spent most of her adult life trying to forget. He was a complicated man, brilliant in some ways, devastatingly selfish in others, and he had walked out of her life when she was 16 with no explanation that satisfied her and no goodbye that felt like enough. She had 20 years of unresolved feelings about Daniel Holloway, and she kept them in a box she tried never to open. But the man had known these mountains, and before he left, he had taught her things. Watch where the branches move, not where the sound comes from. A man in a hurry makes the forest nervous. Follow the nervousness. Grace followed the nervousness. She tracked him for nearly 50 minutes through rough mountain terrain, not because she was fast, but because she was careful. Every step tested before she committed weight. Every pause used to listen. The cold worked itself into her bones. Her scrubs were not made for mountain tracking. Her shoes were not made for uneven ground. She stumbled twice and caught herself on pine bark both times, and each time she stopped and listened to make sure she had not given herself away. She smelled wood smoke before she saw anything. Then she saw the light, pale yellow leaking from a cracked window in an old cabin set back in a small clearing. The kind of cabin that had probably been used for deer season once and then slowly forgotten. Weathered boards, a rusted roof, a truck parked on what looked like a service road she could not have found on any map. No power line, no visible generator, off the grid in every way that mattered. Grace stopped at the edge of the clearing. She crouched behind a fallen pine and she watched and she breathed and she counted her own heartbeats until they slowed down enough for her to think clearly. Then she heard the child's voice. "I want to go home." 3 words, small and tight and precise, said with the particular bravery of a child who is determined not to cry and losing the battle by degrees. Grace closed her hand around a branch and held on. "That's not happening tonight," the man said. Calm, almost gentle, which was somehow worse than if he had shouted. "Sit still. Where are we? Somewhere your father will have to work hard to find." A pause. "Is my dad coming?" "That depends entirely on your dad." Grace filed that. "That depends entirely on your dad. Not a random predator, not a stranger motivated by opportunism or impulse. This was designed, targeted, which meant the child had been chosen specifically, which meant someone was going to receive a demand, which meant there was a clock she could not see running somewhere. She needed to get to that window. She moved in a slow arc around the clearing's edge, 12 careful minutes to cover 40 feet, and when she finally pressed her back against the cabin's side wall and straightened enough to see through the broken corner of the window, the full picture assembled itself in front of her. The boy was in a wooden chair in the middle of the room, 7 years old maybe, light blue pajamas, one sock, holding a stuffed fox, a worn, soft, clearly beloved stuffed fox pressed tight against his chest like armor. He was not tied yet, but he was not moving either, and Grace understood immediately why. He had already figured out the way children figure things out faster than adults expect. That stillness was safety. The man stood across the room with his back partially turned, looking at his phone. Lean, mid-40s, the face of someone who had carried a specific grievance for so long, it had reorganized his features around it. He was not raging, he was not panicking, he was settled. That was the most frightening thing Grace had seen all night. She dropped back below the window line and moved along the cabin wall until she found what she was looking for, the gap between the timber supports, 18 inches of dark space between the floorboards and the cold ground. She got down on her hands and knees, and she crawled in. Under the cabin, the world became close and cold and absolute. She found a position directly beneath where she estimated the boy was sitting, and she pressed her ear to the ground, and she listened. The man made his phone call. "Tell Lucas I have his son. If he calls the police, he'll find Noah in pieces. Tell him Ethan says hello." There it was. Noah. The boy's name was Noah, and the man was Ethan, and he was calling someone to deliver a message to someone named Lucas. And the way he said Lucas, loaded with decades of something that had long since passed, bitterness, and become something harder, told Grace everything she needed to know about what kind of danger she was dealing with. This was not a kidnapping born from desperation or debt. This was a kidnapping born from a lifetime of feeling cheated. Those are the most dangerous kind, because desperate men can be negotiated with. Men who feel robbed of something fundamental, power, recognition, love, inheritance, identity. Those men have already decided the ledger cannot be balanced by ordinary means. Ethan had decided Noah was the currency. Grace pressed her mouth to a gap in the floorboards. "Hey," she breathed, barely a sound, less than a whisper. "Hey, can you hear me?" Silence. Then the tight, careful sound of a child trying very hard not to react. "My name is Grace," she said, voice so low it was almost just shape without volume. "I'm a nurse. I'm underneath the floor right now. I need you to keep your face completely still and talk to me as quiet as you can." "Can you do that?" A long pause. She heard him breathing. Then, "Yes." "What's your name?" "Noah." "Noah. Good. Are you hurt anywhere? My wrist, where he grabbed me. A beat, and my foot is cold. The missing sneaker. Grace had to press her hand flat against the dirt to keep herself steady. Okay, I'm gonna get you out of here, but I need a little time and I need your help. Can you do something for me? Whatever. I need you to watch him. Everything he does, when he goes outside, when he eats, when his back is turned. You tell me when you can. Okay, you're going to be my eyes up there. She heard him shift very slightly in the chair. Like a spy, he whispered. Exactly like a spy, one of the best ones. Another pause, and then something she had not expected, something that broke her heart cleanly open, and then somehow repaired it at the same time he whispered, okay, I can do that. 7 years old, terrified, cold, one shoe. And he said, I can do that. Grace closed her eyes. Noah, I need you to hear me. I'm not going anywhere. You understand I'm not leaving this spot. Not without you. She meant it the way she meant very few things in her life, not as comfort, not as professional reassurance, as a covenant, the same kind of bone-deep, non-negotiable promise she had made to her mother years ago when her mother got sick. The kind of promise that reorganizes your priorities so completely that everything else becomes secondary noise. Promise, he whispered. I promise. The footsteps above her shifted. Ethan was moving back toward the center of the room. Grace went perfectly still. For the next hour, she learned Ethan Callahan in pieces. Noah fed her information in stolen fragments, 30 seconds here, a whispered sentence there during the moments when Ethan turned away or stepped to the far end of the cabin or spent a few minutes on his phone again. He drank from a flask. Not heavily, not yet, but steadily. The kind of drinking that is not about pleasure, but about maintenance, keeping something tamped down that wants to come up. He checked his phone every 15 minutes, waiting for a response. He heated something on a camp stove, ate alone, did not offer Noah anything, then seemed to remember himself and cut half a granola bar and placed it on the chair arm without a word. Noah ate it. That one small, practical exchange, the kidnapper feeding his captive out of some residual functional instinct that had not yet been overridden by the rage, told Grace that Ethan was still inside certain limits. Still capable of something that was not pure cruelty. For now, but the waiting was changing him. She could hear it in his pacing. The intervals were shortening. The footsteps were heavier. He had sent his demand. He had not received his answer. And that gap between the demand delivered and the response not yet arriving, that was where men like Ethan Callahan became unpredictable. He's looking at his phone again, Noah whispered, barely audible. His face got different. Different how? Tight, like when my dad is really mad, but trying not to show it. Grace processed that. Lucas had either received the message and was deciding how to respond, or the message had not gotten through. Either way, the silence on Ethan's phone was a problem. Noah, when he came in from outside earlier, which direction? Did he come from the front or the side? Side, near the truck. Did he lock the door behind him? A pause while Noah remembered. He pushed it. Didn't turn any key. No lock, or a broken one. Grace stored the information. She was building a picture she did not yet know how to use, but she was building it because that was what you did when resources were this limited. You cataloged everything. You waited for the moment when the catalog would matter. Then Ethan's voice came again, and it was different this time. The control was slipping just slightly at the edges. You know what's funny, he said. To Noah, the almost conversational tone of a man who has been alone with his own thoughts too long. Your father probably doesn't even know your teacher's name. You know that? Noah said nothing. He knows the name of every person on his payroll, every manager, every associate, but I'd bet a lot of money he cannot name one single friend you have at school. Still nothing from Noah. I used to know every single one of Lucas's friends, Ethan said. Every one, because I was the one who introduced him to half of them. Before everything. A pause. You don't know what I'm talking about. You're 7. I'm 8. Noah said quietly. A beat. You're 8, Ethan repeated, and for one strange second, something moved across his voice that was almost human. He missed your birthday last year, didn't he? It was not a question. Noah's silence was the answer. Grace pressed her forehead against the cold dirt and breathed. This was the truth of it. Not money, not territory, not business. This was a man who had watched his brother become powerful and respected and wealthy while Ethan had become nothing and had spent so long in that shadow that the shadow had become the whole story of his life. Noah was not the target. Noah was the instrument. The real target was something Ethan could never actually destroy because it lived inside him, not inside Lucas. That made Ethan Callahan the most dangerous kind of person. A man at war with something he cannot defeat. He's going outside, Noah breathed suddenly. He's going to the truck. He looks angry. Grace heard the side door open and close. She pressed her mouth back to the gap. Noah, good job. Listen to me, I need you to look around the room. Slowly, tell me what you see that could be useful. Rope, a tool, anything near the door, anything I could reach if you slid it to the edge of the floor somehow. Take your time. A pause. She pictured him turning his head, carefully scanning with the systematic, solemn attention of a child who has just decided he is a spy and takes the assignment seriously. There's a bucket near the window, old wood handle. Good. There's some rags on the shelf and cans. Good. And there's a board on the floor by the door, a loose one. I can hear it when he walks on it. Grace stopped breathing for one full second, a loose board near the door. She began calculating angles from underneath. Noah, she said very slowly, you're doing so well. I need you to listen to me very carefully about what comes next. Above her, she heard the truck door slam. Ethan was coming back. I'm listening, Noah whispered. Good, because I'm going to need you to be the bravest 8-year-old who ever lived. Not tonight, but soon. A silence. Then so small she almost missed it, she heard Noah pull the stuffed fox a little tighter against his chest. Okay, he said. And somewhere in the dark and outside, Ethan Callahan walked back toward the cabin with his flask in his hand and his phone still silent and his rage growing by the hour, completely unaware that the woman crouched beneath his floor was no longer just surviving. She was planning. Ethan came back smelling like cold air and whiskey and the particular kind of frustration that lives just below the surface of a man who has been waiting too long for something he believes he deserves. Grace heard him the moment the side door opened. She heard the weight of him heavier than before, each step carrying a new layer of impatience, and she pressed herself flatter against the cold ground and held completely still. Still nothing, Ethan said. Not to Noah, to himself, the way men talk to themselves when the silence from the other end has started to feel like an insult. Noah said nothing. Your father thinks if he waits long enough, the problem solves itself. Ethan set something down on the wooden table, the flask, from the sound of it. That's always been his move. Wait, let other people break first. Let other people carry the cost. A pause. You know what the problem with that strategy is, kid? Noah still said not a word. The problem, Ethan said quietly, is that I'm not other people. Grace tracked his footsteps across the floorboards above her. He was moving toward the far corner now, toward what she guessed was some kind of cot or bedroll. She heard him sit down heavily, heard him exhale. She pressed her mouth back to the gap. Noah, she breathed. He's sitting down. Yes, came the tiny response. Far corner, back to us. Us. That word, that small, instinctive, devastating word. Grace felt something tighten in her chest. An 8-year-old boy in a cabin in the Tennessee mountains with one shoe and a stuffed fox had just said us, and without meaning to, without knowing what he was doing, he had made them a team. She did not have time to feel it fully. She cataloged it and moved forward. Good, she whispered. How are your hands? Can you move them freely? Yes, he hasn't tied them yet. Yet. That word again. The way Noah used it naturally practically told Grace that the boy had already accepted the shape of his situation with a clarity that children sometimes achieve precisely because they have not yet learned the adult habit of denial. Okay, listen to me very carefully. I need you to do something, very slowly, without looking like you're doing it on purpose. Can you turn the chair just slightly, just a few inches so you're angled toward the loose board by the door? A pause. Why? Because I need to see if I can reach it from underneath. Another pause, longer this time. She could almost feel him thinking it through, measuring the risk, calculating the angle of Ethan's eyeline, deciding whether a small chair movement would read as restlessness or intention. "Okay," he said, "give me a minute." Grace waited. Above her, she heard the creak of the chair, shifting, the sound of a child pretending to be simply uncomfortable, resettling himself the way children do, natural and unremarkable. Then stillness. "Done," Noah breathed. Grace began moving herself along the underside of the floor, sliding on her elbows, through the cold dirt, navigating by sound toward the position of the door. She found the loose board by pressing up gently from beneath, until she felt the give, a half-inch of play in the wood, enough to work with. Maybe enough to communicate with, maybe enough for more than that. She pressed the board up once very slightly, then released it. Above her, she heard Noah inhale sharply. She pressed it again. A signal. "I see it," Noah whispered. Then Ethan's voice crossed the room like a blade. "Who are you talking to?" The silence that followed lasted maybe 3 seconds. To Grace, it lasted approximately 3 years. "Myself," Noah said. Steady, impressively steady. "I do that sometimes. My dad says it's weird." A beat. "Your dad says a lot of things," Ethan said. And then nothing more. Grace let herself breathe again. She had to slow her own heart rate by sheer force of will, the way she did in the ER when a situation was deteriorating and panic was the most expensive thing she could afford. She breathed in for 4 counts, out for 4 counts, and she thought clearly, and she planned. She had been under this cabin for going on 2 hours. Her body had moved past cold into a kind of numb heaviness that she recognized from medical training as early-stage hypothermia's first warning. Not dangerous yet, but a clock. Another clock running alongside all the others. She needed to think about what she actually had. Her nurse's bag. She had pulled it in with her when she crawled under the cabin. Inside it, 2 trauma bandages, a pair of medical scissors, a pen light, 2 saline flushes, 3 pairs of gloves, a blood pressure cuff. She would not be using anytime soon. 4 wrapped granola bars she kept for long shifts, a thermal emergency blanket folded small, and a bottle of ibuprofen. She was not going to defeat a man with a knife in decades of rage using bandages and ibuprofen. But she was a nurse. Nurses did not defeat things. Nurses kept people alive long enough for the situation to change. That was the keep Noah alive. Keep herself functional. Wait for the situation to change, or create the conditions that would change it. She unwrapped 1 granola bar silently as she could manage. It owed half of it in small, careful bites and put the other half back. She unfolded the thermal blanket around her shoulders and immediately felt the difference, not warm, not even close to warm, but no longer losing heat at the same rate. It would buy her time. Then she heard Ethan's phone buzz. The sound of it, one single vibration on a wooden surface, changed the entire atmosphere of the cabin in an instant. Like a pressure shift before a storm. Grace felt it even from underneath. Ethan picked up immediately. "Yeah." A pause. "I've been waiting 4 hours." Another pause longer, and Grace heard his breathing change. "I don't care what he said. I don't care about his timeline. I care about mine." His voice was dropping in register, which she had already learned meant he was getting more dangerous, not less. "You tell him this is not a negotiation. You tell him the price goes up for every hour he makes me wait. You tell him." He stopped. Whatever came through the phone stopped him completely. The silence on his end lasted a long time. Long enough that Noah turned his head slightly toward Grace's position, the tiniest movement checking instinctive, and Grace pressed the loose board up once gently. "I'm here. I'm still here." When Ethan spoke again, his voice had changed shape entirely. He actually said that. Not a question. Flat. Quiet. The flatness of a man who has just had a belief confirmed that he wished he could have kept doubting. He actually said he needs to verify I have the boy first. A pause. "Fine," Ethan said. "Fine, I'll send him proof. But you tell Lucas that the next message he gets won't be something he can verify. It'll be something he has to live with." He ended the call. Grace heard him stand, heard him move, heard him pick up something from the table. "Noah." Ethan's voice was almost gentle now, in the way that things go quiet right before they go very wrong. "I need you to look at the phone for me. Hold still. Wipe him out. So your father knows you're real." A pause. "He doesn't know I'm real." Something crossed Ethan's voice. Not quite guilt, more like the irritation of a man whose plan requires him to interact with the human cost of it. He just needs to see you, that's all. Look at the camera and say your name and say you're okay. Am I okay? The question landed in the cabin like something dropped from a height. Ethan did not answer it for a long moment. You're okay right now, he finally said. What about later? Another silence. Grace pressed her fist against her mouth. That depends on your father, Ethan said. So let's hope he starts making better decisions than he usually does. She heard the phone camera click. She heard Ethan's footsteps retreat. And then she heard something she had not expected, Noah's voice, very small, aimed down toward the floor. Grace. She was at the gap immediately. I'm here. He's going back to the cot. He's sending something to my dad. A beat. Grace, is my dad going to come? How do you answer that? How do you answer that question honestly in the dark from underneath the floor to an 8-year-old who is asking it with the terrible sincerity of a child who has already started doing the math on whether the people who are supposed to save him are going to show up? Grace chose honesty over comfort because Noah had already earned it. I think your father is going to try very hard, she said. But I need you to understand something. Whatever your dad does or doesn't do, that is not your job right now. Your job is just to hold on. And my job is to make sure you have something to hold on to. You understand? A pause. You sound like a nurse, Noah whispered. Despite everything, despite the cold and the dangers and the fear that was permanently occupying the back of her mind, Grace almost smiled. That's because I am one, she said. My mom was a nurse, Noah said quietly. She died when I was 4. Grace closed her eyes in the dark. I'm sorry, Noah. My dad doesn't talk about her much. Another pause. Uncle Ethan used to, before everything got bad. His voice was very careful around that last sentence, like someone stepping around something sharp. He used to come to our house when I was littler. He used to bring me things. Grace absorbed this, turned it over. Noah, your Uncle Ethan used to visit you. Yeah, then they had a big fight. I don't know what about. After that, my dad said we weren't going to see Uncle Ethan anymore. A pause. I didn't think he meant like this. Neither did anyone, she thought. That was exactly the problem. The people who were supposed to prevent this had filed Ethan under family problem and closed the folder, and family problems had a way of escalating inside closed folders until the day they didn't fit inside anymore. Above her, Ethan had gone quiet. She could hear his breathing from the cot. Not sleep, not yet, but the enforced stillness of a man trying to hold himself together while the waiting did its slow, corrosive work. Grace made a decision. She had to send a signal. She had no phone, no radio, no way to communicate with the outside world from under a cabin in the middle of the Smoky Mountain wilderness. But she was not without options, and she had been cataloging them for the last 2 hours with the methodical focus of someone who has learned from years of emergency medicine that the difference between survival and catastrophe is almost always a question of what you do with the resources you actually have rather than the ones you wish you had. Her father's voice again, unbidden, unwelcome, accurate. 3 fires on a ridgeline mean distress. Has meant that since before your grandfather's grandfather was born. You don't need a phone if you've got fire and high ground. She didn't have high ground yet, but she was going to. The plan assembled itself in pieces the way plans do when you are not trying to force them into shape, but letting the available facts arrange themselves logically. She could not escape from under this cabin without crossing open ground that Ethan might see. She could not take Noah without a moment of chaos that would draw Ethan toward them. She could not create that chaos without being above ground mobile and ready to move. And she could not do any of those things in the next hour because Ethan was awake, aware, and armed. But in 3 or 4 hours, when the whiskey and the exhaustion and the long corrosive wait had done what they always eventually did to a man running on rage and no sleep, that was a different window. Noah, she whispered, I need you to do one more thing for me tonight, and then I need you to try to sleep. Sleep here. I know it's hard, but your body needs it, and I need you sharp when it matters. A pause. What's the one more thing? Tell me where the truck key is. Did you see where he put it? A longer pause this time. She could feel him thinking back, running the reel of the evening through his mind with the careful precision he had been applying to everything since she told him he was his jacket pocket. Noah said finally. Left side. He took it out when he came back from outside, looked at it, and put it back. Left jacket pocket. Grace stored it. You're extraordinary, she told him, and she meant it without qualification. I'm just scared, Noah said. Those aren't opposites, Grace said. Brave people are scared all the time. That's what makes it brave. She heard him shift in the chair, heard the soft sound of the stuffed fox being repositioned, held differently, maybe more comfortably, settling in for something long. Then above the cabin, something changed. It was subtle, the kind of change you only hear when you've been listening with your entire body for hours. Ethan's breathing from the cot shifted from the held tension of forced stillness into something slower, something that had given up the fight at least for the next few hours. He was asleep. Grace counted 10 full minutes before she moved. Then she pulled herself out from under the cabin on the far side, away from the truck, away from the door into the cold open air of the mountain night, and she stood up for the first time in 3 hours. Her legs nearly gave out. She grabbed the cabin wall and held on and breathed through her teeth until the blood came back into her feet and the dizziness cleared and the world stopped tilting. Her back was locked, her knees were shaking. Her hands were so cold she could not fully close them. She stood there for 30 seconds, getting her body back. Then she looked at the ridge line above the cabin. High ground, trees, a clear line of sight to the sky in at least 2 directions. It was maybe a 6-minute climb in the dark, maybe 8 given the state of her legs. She looked back at the cabin. Dark, still. One pale light left on inside battery-powered that Ethan had not turned off. She thought about Noah in that chair holding his fox, trying to sleep, believing she was still beneath the floor. She reached into her bag, took out the pen light, and pointed it at the window crack. She clicked it 3 times slowly. A signal she had no reason to believe Noah would interpret correctly. A signal she sent anyway, because it was what she had. She waited. From inside the cabin, so faint she might have imagined it, she saw the stuffed fox appear briefly in the window gap, held up by 2 small hands. Then gone. He had seen her. He knew she was moving. He trusted her. Grace turned and started climbing. The ridge was harder than 6 minutes. Her body was running on fumes, the half granola bar and willpower, and the specific non-negotiable terror of knowing that a child's life was attached to her ability to keep moving. She climbed it by feel and memory, using the trees as handholds, testing each step in the dark, and she thought about her father with something that was no longer entirely complicated. 3 fires on a ridge line, high and visible, spaced 50 feet apart. Anybody who's looking will know what it means. She reached the ridgetop, breathing hard, her scrubs damp with sweat that would turn dangerous the moment she stopped moving. She had no lighter. She had not had a lighter since she quit smoking 9 years ago after her mother's first health scare. She had medical scissors, she had the thermal blanket, Mylar reflective, technically inflammable. She had 2 saline flushes. She had the ibuprofen bottle. She stood on the ridge in the dark and she took inventory and she thought. Then she looked down. Through the trees, through the dark, maybe 80 feet below a pale yellow light from the cabin window. And somewhere in that light, an 8-year-old boy named Noah. And somewhere beyond these mountains, a man named Lucas Callahan, who did not know that the person keeping his son alive was an exhausted ER nurse who had been awake for over 20 hours and was currently standing on a ridge with no lighter, no signal, and no plan B. Grace sat down on a flat rock at the top of that ridge, and she looked at the sky, which was clearing. Now stars appearing between the clouds, cold and bright and completely indifferent to everything happening beneath them. She had the rest of the night to solve the fire problem, so she started solving it. And in the cabin below her, Ethan Callahan slept not peacefully, never peacefully, but deeply enough while his phone sat silent on the table, and the hours moved, and somewhere across the mountains in a house with too many rooms and too much security, and not nearly enough of what actually mattered, a man named Lucas Callahan sat with his right-hand man Marcus in a phone and a photograph of a 7-year-old boy in the specific crushing humiliation of a powerful man who has just learned that power is not the same thing as control. The fire problem came down to friction, dry bark, and desperation. Grace had been a nurse for 14 years, not a survivalist. But her father had spent 3 weekends teaching her fire starting when she was 12 in the way that men who know they are about to leave Sometimes pour everything they have left into a single concentrated burst of usefulness, as if knowledge can substitute for presence. She had hated those weekends. She had loved them. She had never decided which feeling was correct and had eventually stopped trying. She spent 40 minutes on that ridge in the dark finding the right materials, by touch dry moss tucked under a rock overhang, a piece of bark that crumbled correctly between her fingers, a stick that had been dead long enough to lose its moisture, but not long enough to lose its hardness. She worked slowly, deliberately, making no sound. Her hands were so cold she had to stop twice and press them under her arms until the feeling came back enough to be useful. The first ember came at the 50-minute mark. It was tiny. It was barely anything. It lived for 4 seconds before she breathed wrong and killed it. She started again. The second ember lasted longer. She fed it moss so carefully it felt like surgery, the same quality of attention she gave to a patient whose airway was compromised and whose margin for error was measured in millimeters. The ember grew. She added bark. She added a small stick. She curved her body around it to block the wind, and she breathed into it at the correct angle, in the correct depth, and she refused to feel anything other than the single task directly in front of her. The fire caught. A small fire. Not a bonfire, not a signal yet. Just the beginning of a signal, which was all she needed it to be right now. She built it carefully into something real, something that would survive without her constant attention, and then she moved 50 feet along the ridge and started the second one, then the third. Each one took less time than the last because her hands were warming and her confidence was compounding, and because there is a point in any crisis where the body finally stops arguing with the situation and simply performs. 3 fires, 50 feet apart, on the highest ridge she could reach. She stepped back and looked at what she had built. Then she heard the cabin door slam below. Ethan was awake. Grace dropped immediately flat on the ridge, face down arms, in the way her father had once showed her how soldiers moved when they needed to disappear on open ground. The fires were behind her now, burning in a line visible from the air and from any high point within miles. They were also visible from the cabin clearing. If Ethan looked up at exactly the right angle, she heard him below. Moving around the truck, the sound of a man who woke up from insufficient sleep into a situation that had not improved while he was unconscious, which was the worst possible way to wake up. "Hey!" His voice carrying through the cold air. He was back inside now, talking to Noah. "You sleep." A little, Noah's voice. Careful, neutral. "You hungry?" Yes. The mundane brutality of it. A man who had kidnapped a child asking if the child was hungry, as if that question existed in a separate room from all the other questions. Grace pressed herself up to a crouch. She needed to get back down before Ethan noticed the fires, and she needed to do it without being seen, and she needed to get back under that cabin before Noah was put in a position of lying about her location. She started moving down the ridge. Halfway down, her foot slipped on loose rock. She went sideways, caught herself on a tree trunk with both hands, but not before making exactly the kind of sound that a careful person in a dangerous situation cannot afford to make. A crash. A scatter of small rocks. Brief but not brief enough. She froze. Below the cabin went silent. Then Ethan's voice. Quieter now. Focused. "What was that?" "I didn't hear anything," Noah said. Too fast. He had corrected immediately. She could hear the slight overemphasis of a child who had decided to lie and was not yet experienced enough to do it lazily. A pause from Ethan. Long. Evaluating. "Animals," he said finally. But the word didn't settle. It hovered. Grace did not move for 4 minutes. She counted them. She stood against that tree in the dark, and she did not shift her weight or adjust her grip or allow herself to shiver even as the cold worked through her clothes and the bark pressed into her palms, and everything in her body screamed to move. 4 minutes, then she heard Ethan go back inside. She covered the remaining distance to the cabin at half her previous speed, twice her previous care. Every footfall chosen, every branch avoided. By the time she slid back under the cabin, she was shaking not from fear, or not only from fear, but from the physiological reality of a body that had now been operating in extreme cold for coming up on 5 hours with inadequate fuel and insufficient rest. She was in trouble, not crisis yet, but the margin was shrinking. She pressed her mouth to the gap. "Noah." He was there instantly. I heard you slip. I know, you did well. I lied to him. I know, you did the right thing. It didn't feel good, Noah said quietly. Lying. Grace felt the unexpected precision of that observation, a child raised to tell the truth, working out in real time what it felt like to compromise that in the service of something larger. This was not a small thing. This was the beginning of moral complexity for an 8-year-old arriving on the worst possible night. It doesn't feel good, she agreed, but some lies protect people. Those ones are worth the count. You'll only know the difference when you're older. A pause. How come? Because the lies that protect people leave you feeling complicated, she said. The lies that protect yourself just leave you feeling empty. Silence, then. He's eating. His back is to me. Back to the job. Good boy. The fire's on the ridge, Grace said. Did you see them through the window? A pause. I saw light up there. I thought it was you, but I wasn't sure. It was me. I built 3 signal fires. If anyone is searching these mountains, they'll see them. Is someone searching? And there it was again, the question Grace could not answer with full honesty without taking something from this child that he needed more than he needed accuracy. Hope was a resource. In medicine, she had seen it keep people alive past every clinical prediction. She was not going to drain his supply with uncertainty he couldn't act on. Your father received a video of you last night, she said. He knows you are in these mountains. He will be looking. But you don't know if he's actually Noah. Gently. Focus on what we can control. Okay. A pause. Okay. Then Ethan's phone rang. Not a text this time. An actual call. And Ethan answered it on the first ring with the speed of a man who had been staring at that phone for hours, willing it to move. Yeah. A beat. Yeah, I see it. His voice changed shape entirely. Something that had been wound tight started to release in a way that was not relief, but was something more frightening than tension. The loosening of a man who has just received confirmation of something he had talked himself into wanting. So he's moving. Good. He should be moving. Tell me the route, Bob. A pause. No, that doesn't work. If he comes in from the East Road, I see him coming for 20 minutes. That's too controlled. I want him to feel what it's like to not be in control. His voice was hardening back up again. Tell him to come alone. No Marcus. No team. One car. If I see more than one set of headlights on that mountain, the deal changes. Grace listened. Lucas was coming. Lucas was coming, and Ethan was already reshaping the terms. Because that was what this had always been about. Not the money, not even the revenge exactly, but the feeling of holding the controls. The feeling of being the one who decided. Ethan had spent years watching his brother decide everything that mattered and being decided about, and now for the first time in that long losing streak, he was the one giving the instructions and the universe was obeying. That feeling was going to be more intoxicating than the whiskey and more dangerous. He knows your father is coming, she breathed to Noah. Is that good? Noah whispered. It means we have a shorter window than I thought. A beat. What happens when my dad gets here? Grace heard Ethan pacing again above here, faster now. Energy looking for an outlet. Grace, Noah said, very quietly. What happens when my dad gets here? She had to be honest, even about this. That depends on what your uncle decides he actually wants, she said. And right now, I don't think your uncle knows. He wants to hurt my dad. Yes. But my dad's not here yet, so he stopped himself. He was working it out. An 8-year-old working out the logical structure of his own jeopardy, and Grace had the specific nauseating experience of watching a child arrive at an accurate and terrible conclusion. So right now I'm what he uses until my dad gets here. Noah, am I right? She did not insult him by pausing too long. Yes, she said, which means we need to change the situation before your father arrives. Because when Lucas gets here, Ethan's attention moves, and I can't control what happens then. A silence from above. Then Noah said very carefully, the truck key. Yes. If the truck doesn't work, he can't take me anywhere when my dad comes. That's the idea. A longer pause. She could hear him thinking through the geometry of it. His jacket is on the chair by the cot, Noah whispered. He took it off when he started pacing. Left pocket. Grace closed her eyes and thought. The jacket. Across the room from Noah. between Noah and the door, on a chair next to a sleeping area where Ethan was not sleeping, but was pacing in diminishing circles the way animals pace when confinement and anticipation combine into something unmanageable. This was not yet possible, but it was going to become possible because situations always changed, and her job was to be ready when this one did. Then everything changed faster than she expected. Ethan stopped pacing. She heard him pick something up from the table. She heard the particular sound of a prepaid phone camera, the fake shutter click of a man creating a record of something. Then his voice, completely different now, low and deliberate and shaped for maximum damage the way words are shaped when the person speaking them has chosen cruelty as a tool. "Lucas, I want you to see something." And then Noah's voice alarmed, sudden, unable to maintain the careful neutrality he had been holding for hours. "What are you here? Smile for the camera, kid." "I don't want to." "I'm not asking you to want to." A pause. "I'm showing your father what 48 hours of his choices looks like." "Hold still." Grace heard Noah's breath go jagged. She pressed up against the floorboards with both hands as if she could push through them by will alone. "Hey," Ethan's voice directed downward, now a fraction softer. "Just a fraction. I'm not going to touch you right now. I just need him to see that you're cold and you're tired and you're scared. Because that's true, isn't it?" A silence. "Isn't it?" Ethan said again. Not a question. "Yes," Noah said, very small. "Good. That's all I need." The phone sound again. A message sending. And then Ethan's voice talking to the phone, now recording something additional. 72 hours, Lucas. Not 48. You made me wait. That cost you. Come alone. Come to where it started. You know where that is. And come understanding that I have nothing left to lose, which is something you should have thought about 10 years ago before you decided I didn't exist anymore. Come to where it started. Grace filed that phrase and felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. A location known to both brothers. A place with meaning. A place Ethan had already chosen. Which meant Ethan had not been improvising at all. This cabin was temporary. The final location, wherever Lucas was being directed, was the real stage for whatever Ethan was planning. The cabin was not the destination. It was the waiting room. She had maybe hours before Ethan moved Noah. Grace, Noah's voice at the floor, barely anything. He went outside again. He's walking around the truck. She was at the gap instantly. "The jacket," she said. "Is it still on the chair?" "Yes." "How far is the chair from where you're sitting?" "Maybe 8 feet. And Ethan, can you see him through the window?" "He's at the back of the truck. His back is to the cabin." 8 feet. A man outside with the back turned. A key in a left jacket pocket. "Noah," Grace said, "I need you to make a decision right now. And I need you to make it yourself because I cannot make it for you." A beat. "Okay. The key, can you get to it and get back to your chair before he comes back in?" She heard his breathing change. Faster. The breathing of someone who is genuinely frightened and working through it rather than around it. "I don't know," he said. "That's honest. What does your gut say?" A pause. "I think yes. If I'm fast." "Then tell me when." The word landed between them like a match dropped on dry ground. When, not whether. He had already decided. She heard Noah stand up from the chair for the first time since she had found him. She heard his one-shoed, socked footsteps cross the floor. Careful, quick, the particular silence a child can achieve when silence is the difference between safe and not. She heard him reach the jacket. She heard fabric move. She heard him inhale sharply. He had it. She heard him move acting. She heard him sit down. "Got it," he breathed. So quiet, she felt it more than heard it. "Good. Close your hand around it and don't let it rattle. Slide it down through the gap in the floorboard when you can." 20 seconds. 30. She heard Ethan's footsteps crunch back toward the cabin door. The key came through the gap and landed in Grace's palm like an answered prayer. She closed her fingers around it and did not allow herself to feel anything about it. Yet. Not relief, not triumph, nothing that would slow her down. Above her, the cabin door opened. Ethan came back in. She heard him walk to the jacket, and her heart stopped. Heard him check the pocket. Silence. "Where are my keys?" Ethan said. Not loud, not angry yet. Quiet the way a house gets quiet right before something breaks. I don't know, Noah said. The flatness of a child who had used up his shock and his panic and arrived somewhere on the other side that was almost calm, almost brave. The specific bravery of a person who has already given everything they have and discovered there is still more underneath. They were in my jacket. Maybe they fell out, Noah said. When you were outside? A long silence. Grace pressed herself against the cold earth and held the truck key against her chest and did not breathe. Then Ethan's footsteps moved back toward the door. He was going to look outside. He would not find them outside. And when he came back, the situation would change. Grace had maybe the next 4 minutes to decide what she was going to do with a truck key, a thermal blanket, a pen light, a nurse's bag, and 3 fires burning on a ridgeline that she could only hope someone with authority and the ability to act was looking at from a distance. She pressed the key into the palm of her hand until she felt its specific shape, a worn, ordinary truck key, the most important object she had ever held, and she started building the next step of a plan she was making up in real time in the dark under a floor, while a desperate man searched outside for something he was never going to find. And on a mountain road 40 minutes away, a convoy of black vehicles moved through the dark with their lights off, which meant someone was already looking, which meant the 3 fires on the ridgeline had done exactly what she built them to do. She did not know that yet, but she was about to find out. Ethan came back inside with empty hands and a changed face. Grace heard it in his footsteps. First, the weight had shifted. The searching anger of a man looking for misplaced keys had curdled into something slower and more deliberate, the way water changes just before it reaches boiling. He had not found them outside. He had walked the perimeter of the truck, checked the ground, retraced his steps, and come back with nothing. And now the part of his brain that had been running on adrenaline and certainty was being forced to consider a possibility he had not built into his plan. He stood in the middle of the cabin and said nothing for a long time. Noah did not move. Grace beneath the floor did not breathe. You know what I think, Ethan said finally. Conversational. The false calm of a man deciding which direction to go. What? Noah said, flat, careful. I think those keys didn't fall out of my jacket. Silence. I think things don't just fall out of zipped pockets. It wasn't zipped, Noah said. I saw it when you took it off. The zipper was open. A beat. Grace felt something complicated move through her, the specific pride of watching a child outmaneuver an adult in real time, in a situation where the cost of failure was something she refused to think about too specifically. Maybe, Ethan said, one word. But it conceded the point at least temporarily, and Grace felt the immediate danger of that particular moment pass like a train going through without stopping. Ethan moved to the shelf near the window. She heard him rummaging. Looking for the spare key she was now gambling did not exist, or if it did exist, was not easily found. The truck was old. Spares for old trucks lived in kitchen drawers and junk boxes at home, not in mountain cabins. He didn't find one. She heard him exhale long and controlled the exhale of a man performing patience he does not actually feel. Doesn't matter, he said, more to himself than to Noah. We're not using the truck anyway. Change of plan. Grace's stomach dropped. Change of plan. She had the key. She had built her entire next step around having the key. And Ethan had just casually disassembled that step with 3 words, the way the universe periodically reminded you that control was an illusion and contingency planning was the only honest response to being alive. She pressed her mouth to the gap. She had to wait until Ethan moved away from the center of the room. She tracked his footsteps. He was back to pacing shorter intervals than before. The energy of a man who had made a decision and was now running the consequences of it through his head. Noah. She breathed so soft it was almost just the shape of the name. New plan, listen. She felt rather than heard him orient toward the floor. When he moves you from this cabin, she said, I need you to leave a trail. Anything, a piece of that fox if you can bear it. Your sock, anything that marks the direction. A pause. So small she almost missed it. Then not the fox. Then your sock, the left one. Catch it on a branch when he walks you out. Another pause. Okay. And Noah, when you're outside, look up. Tell me you'll do that. Why? Because I'll be there. I won't be behind you. I'll be ahead. But I need you to know I'm close. She heard him breathe. How can you be ahead if you do not know where he's taking me? It was a good question. It was the best possible question, and Grace answered it with the only truth she had. Because there's only one direction from this cabin that leads to higher ground with a clear sight line. And I know these mountains, and your uncle doesn't. A silence, then with the quiet certainty of someone choosing to believe something, not because it is provable, but because the alternative is unbearable. Okay. Above her, Ethan had stopped pacing. Get up, he said. We're moving. Grace was out from under the cabin before Noah's chair scraped the floor. She came out on the far side away from the door, moved fast and low around the cabin's perimeter, and got herself into the tree line before the side door opened. She moved 30 feet into the trees and stopped pressing behind a pine wide enough to cover her, and she watched. Ethan came out first. He had his knife on his belt. She could see it now in the pre-dawn gray that had started to dilute the dark, and he had a backpack over one shoulder and Noah's upper arm in his right hand. Not rough, not gentle. The grip of a man transporting something valuable that he intends to still have when he arrives. Noah was walking. One shoe, one sock. The stuffed fox tucked inside the front of his pajama top because some child somewhere had understood intuitively that visible things get taken and hidden things sometimes survive. Grace felt everything she had been suppressing for the past several hours compress into a single specific burning focus. This child, this direction, this moment. She watched where Ethan was headed, not west toward the service road, north, uphill, toward the ridge, toward her fires which were still burning lower, now the first light of dawn beginning to thin their visibility, but burning. He was taking Noah toward the ridge, toward the place she had built the signals. That was either a terrible coincidence or Ethan had seen the fires and was moving toward them for a reason that Grace could not yet read, and neither option was comfortable. She moved parallel through the trees, tracking them at a distance of 30 feet, keeping Ethan in her peripheral line without positioning herself where a turned head might catch movement. She was moving faster than she had moved all night, fueled by the specific, reckless energy that arrives when the situation accelerates past the point where careful is still a meaningful option. Noah was slowing Ethan down. The terrain was rough and the child had one shoe, and Ethan was having to modulate his pace to keep Noah upright, which was buying Grace the margin she needed to stay ahead. She pushed past them in a wide arc through the trees. She got to the ridgeline first. The 3 fires were there. The first 2 had burned down to embers, not visible from a distance anymore. The third still had some life in it. She fed it quickly, quietly, adding the driest bark she could grab in 30 seconds, and then she moved away from it further along the ridge to a position behind a cluster of boulders where she could see the path Ethan would have to take to reach the top. She waited. Her heart was doing something she recognized from medical training as tachycardia, too fast, not dangerous yet, but a signal that her body had consumed its reserves and was now running on the chemical equivalent of fumes and stubbornness. She heard them before she saw them. Noah's uneven footsteps. Ethan's breathing harder now from the climb. Keep moving, Ethan said. I'm trying, Noah said. My foot hurts. Almost there. Almost where Grace scanned the ridgeline from her position. There was a point maybe 80 feet ahead where the ridge opened into a flat, exposed area with a long drop on the far side. An old quarry shelf, she realized. She knew this place. Had hiked past it years ago with her father on a Saturday she had spent most of her adult life either treasuring or resenting depending on the day. The quarry shelf. That was where Ethan was going. And in one sickening, clarifying moment she understood why. It was visible from the road below. Lucas, coming up the mountain with instructions to come alone, would be able to see the ridge from the access road. Ethan wanted to be seen. He wanted Lucas to see Noah at the edge of that shelf before Lucas had any ability to respond. He wanted the visual. He wanted the leverage of a father watching his child standing at a drop with a man who had nothing left to lose. Come to where it started, the quarry. This was where it started. This was the place between the brothers. She didn't know the history yet, couldn't know it, but the specificity of Ethan's choice told her this location carried weight that went back further than the kidnapping, further than the fight, further than whatever moment had broken the two of them apart. She had maybe 4 minutes before they reached the shelf. She looked at what she had. The truck key useless now. The pen light, the medical scissors, one remaining granola bar, the thermal blanket still around her shoulders. The empty saline flush bottles, the ibuprofen, her nurse's bag, and then something she had not thought of as a resource until exactly this second. Her voice. Grace stood up from behind the boulders and stepped onto the ridge path. It. Ethan saw her and stopped so fast that Noah lurched forward against his grip. For 3 full seconds, nobody said anything. Grace stood 10 feet in front of them, mud-covered, hollow-eyed, the thermal blanket around her shoulders catching the first pale light of morning like something ancient and accidental. She looked, she knew, absolutely terrible. She had been under a cabin floor for the better part of 5 hours. She had climbed a ridge in the dark. She had not slept in over 24 hours. She was running on 400 calories and willpower and something that lived on the other side of willpower that she did not have a clinical name for. She must have looked to Ethan like something the mountain had produced, like a problem the universe had inserted into his plan without explanation. "Who are you?" Ethan said, flat, not panicked, recalibrating. "My name is Grace Holloway," she said. "I'm a nurse. I was driving home from my shift 2 nights ago when I saw you take him." Ethan's eyes moved fast, professional assessing, checking the trees behind her for backup, finding none. "You've been out here the whole time," he said. Not a question. "Yes." "Those fires were yours." "Yes." A silence. Ethan's grip on Noah's arm did not change. His hand moved toward his belt, not to the knife, not yet, but close to it, establishing proximity, reminding her it was there. "You should have kept driving," he said. "I know," Grace said. "I thought about it." "Why didn't you?" She looked past him at Noah. Noah was staring at her with an expression she had not seen on his face in any of their whispered conversations. Not fear, not relief, but something that combined both with a third thing that was close to recognition. Like seeing for the first time the face of a voice you had been listening to in the dark. "Because he's 8 years old," Grace said, "and he was old and scared and alone. I'm a nurse. That's not a situation I can drive past." Ethan studied her. She let him. She kept her own face open and still the same face she used when she told families things they did not want to hear. The face that says, "I am not hiding anything," which is always more disarming than the face that tries to project strength. "You have no weapon," Ethan said. "No. No backup that I can see." "No. You climbed up here anyway." "Yes." He shook his head, slowly. The head shake of a man encountering a variable he genuinely did not anticipate and does not know how to file. "That's either very brave or very stupid." "Probably both," Grace said. "My track record on distinguishing between the two isn't great." Something moved across Ethan's face. Not warmth, but the brief, involuntary response of a human being encountering honesty at a moment when they have surrounded themselves entirely with performance and manipulation. It lasted about 1 second before his face closed back down. "Step aside," he said. "I can't do that. You understand what I can do." "I do," she said, "and I understand what you won't do because you haven't yet. You've had opportunities and you haven't used them, which means some part of you is still inside certain limits. I'm not going to pretend I know what those limits are, but I know they're there because Noah is still standing." Ethan went very still. "Don't," he said, quiet. The specific quiet of a man being accurately described at a moment when accuracy is the last thing he wants. "He's your nephew," Grace said. Not accusatory, just true. "You brought him granola bars when he was little. You used to talk about his mother." Something moved through Ethan's face like weather. "You've been under that floor since before you made your first call." "Yes." A silence that had a different quality than the ones before it. Heavier, more complicated. "You don't know anything about me," Ethan said. "I know you feel like Lucas took everything that should have been yours," Grace said. "I know that feeling has been the whole story for long enough that you built a plan around it. I know this ridge means something both of you were here before when things were different." She paused. "I know that the version of you that used to visit Noah and bring him things and talk to him about his mother, that man didn't plan this. The man who got left behind too many times did." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You don't get to do that," he said. "Do what?" "Understand me. You don't get to stand there with nothing and understand me. That's not how this works." "I'm a nurse," Grace said simply. "Understanding people in the worst moments of their lives is literally the job." Noah had not moved, had not made a sound. He was watching Ethan with the focused, patient attention of a child who had spent the last several hours learning exactly when stillness was the right response. Then Ethan's phone rang. All three of them heard it. Ethan pulled it from his pocket without releasing Noah. He looked at the screen. Something crossed his face, complicated, layered the expression of a man who has wanted something for a very long time and is now suddenly not sure he wants it in this form. "Lucas," Grace said. "Yes." "He's here." "Close," Ethan said, and his voice had changed again. Something rising in it, something that had been waiting behind everything else. "Close enough." He answered the call. "Stop the car," Ethan said, "right where you are. Don't come further up the road." A pause. "Because I can see you from here, Lucas. I can see your headlights." "And I said one car, and I count three." His voice hardened. "I said come alone." Grace heard the response, not words, just the tone of a man on the other end working very hard to control a situation from a position of total powerlessness. The tone of a father. "Then tell them to go back," Ethan said. "All of them. And then I want you to get out of the car by yourself, and I want you to look up at this ridge line, and I want you to see where we are. Do that now." A pause. "Do it now, Lucas." Grace looked at Noah. Noah looked at her. And then she did something she had been calculating for the last 4 minutes. She took one slow, deliberate step sideways. Not toward Ethan, not away from him, just sideways, slightly angling herself so that her body was no longer directly between Ethan and the ridge path, but was now positioned at the edge of it. A subtle shift, the kind a tired, non-threatening, very cold nurse might make just to redistribute her weight. Ethan's eyes flicked to her. She didn't move again, stood loose and still and waited. His eyes went back to the phone. "Good," he said to Lucas. "You see us good. Now you understand what the next hour looks like. You're going to come up here alone and we're going to talk, like we should have talked 10 years ago." A pause. Don't say that to me. You have exactly no leverage in this conversation, so whatever prepared speech Marcus wrote for you, put it away." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. Just slightly. Just enough for Grace to hear the exhaustion underneath the rage, the exhaustion of a man who has been carrying something too heavy for too long and has confused the weight of it for strength. "Just come up. Alone." He ended the call, and in the silence that followed, with the early mountain dawn beginning to gray the air and the last of the ridge fires burning low and Noah standing between them with his hand pressed flat against the fox hidden inside his pajama top, Ethan Callahan looked at Grace Holloway with an expression she had seen before. Not often, but before. She had seen it on patients who arrived in the ER with injuries they had sustained from their own choices, who were somewhere between the action and the consequence in that narrow corridor, where people sometimes become briefly visible to themselves in a way they usually manage to avoid. It was the expression of someone who has not yet decided to stop, but has for the first time started to feel the weight of what continuing costs. "He's not going to come alone," Grace said quietly. "You know that." "I know," Ethan said. "So when he comes up with people behind him, what happens?" A silence. "That's his choice." "No," Grace said. "At that point, it becomes your choice, because you're the one holding Noah." Ethan's hand on Noah's arm. She watched it, watched the fingers, watched for the quality of grip to change. "I didn't plan for someone like you," Ethan said. And there was something in it, not quite defeat, not quite concession, but the specific frustration of a man whose plan had been built for a controlled environment and who had instead been given this, an exhausted nurse on a ridgeline who refused to perform the fear he needed her to perform. "Most people don't," Grace said. "What do you want?" he said. "From me, right now, what do you actually want?" She did not hesitate. "I want you to let me stand next to Noah," she said. "That's all. Not between you and him, right next to him. So he's not alone when his father comes up that path." A long pause. "That's all you want?" "That's what I'm asking for right now," she said. "Yes." Ethan looked at her, looked at Noah, looked back at her. And then slowly, without releasing Noah's arm, but without tightening it either, he stepped slightly to the side. It was not agreement. It was not surrender. It was a man making a millimeter of room in a situation he had built with no room in it for reasons he probably could not have articulated if asked. Grace crossed the space between them and stood beside Noah. She did not touch the boy. She stood next to him the way she stood next to patients in the worst moments, close enough to matter, careful enough not to intrude on what they needed to carry themselves. Noah looked up at her. His face, for the first time in however many hours, did something that was not careful or calculated or brave. It just crumpled. Not into crying, not quite, but into the expression that comes just before crying, when the thing you have been holding together finally makes contact with the presence of someone safe, and the muscles that have been working so hard lose the argument with the rest of you. Grace put one hand on his shoulder. Just that, one hand. "I'm here," she said. "I'm right here." And somewhere below on the mountain access road, 3 sets of headlights sat still in the gray morning, and one door opened, and a man who had spent his life ensuring he was always the most powerful person in any room stepped out alone onto a Tennessee mountain road and looked up at a ridgeline where his son was standing next to a woman he had never heard of. Lucas Callahan began to climb, and Grace Holloway stood on that ridge with her hand on Noah's shoulder and Ethan's knife on Ethan's belt, and the whole morning holding its breath around them, and she thought about a promise she had made to a child through a crack in a floorboard in the dark. She had said she would not leave him. She had not left. Whatever happened in the next 10 minutes, that part was already true. And in the specific moral arithmetic of Grace Holloway's life, that mattered more than the outcome. The promise was the thing you controlled. Everything else was just what happened next. Lucas Callahan was not what Grace expected. She had built a picture of him from the pieces Ethan had dropped, powerful, controlled, the kind of man who moved through rooms like weather, who had people paid specifically to absorb the friction of the world before it reached him. She had expected someone who looked like money and moved like authority. The man who came up the ridge path looked like a father. That was all. Just a father. Gray at the temples, expensive jacket unzipped, moving faster than the terrain, was comfortable with breathing hard, not from exertion, but from the specific consuming urgency of a man who has been separated from his child and is now closing that distance and cannot close it fast enough. His eyes found Noah before he was fully over the ridgeline, and when they did, something in his face broke open in a way that no amount of money or power or control could have prevented, because it was not the face he chose to wear. It was the face that was simply there underneath everything else, waiting for exactly this moment. Noah, just the name, said the way you say something when you have been afraid you might not get to say it again. Dad? Noah's voice cracked completely on the single syllable. Grace kept her hand on Noah's shoulder. She felt the boy's whole body move toward his father with a pull that was almost physical, the specific gravitational force of a child and a parent who have been separated and are now close enough to almost close the gap. And she held her position steady because Ethan's hand was still on Noah's arm and the knife was still on Ethan's belt, and Lucas was still 20 feet away, and 20 feet in this particular situation was not close enough. "Stop there," Ethan said. Lucas stopped. His eyes moved from Noah to Ethan, and the thing that happened in his face when he looked at his brother was more complicated than Grace had expected. It was not just anger, it was not just fear. It was the specific expression of a man looking at someone who used to be part of his life and confronting the full weight of how that ended, the guilt and the defensiveness and the grief all arriving simultaneously, each one trying to be the dominant feeling and none of them winning. "Ethan," Lucas said. "You came," Ethan said, flat, almost surprised despite everything. "He's my son. He's also my nephew. Didn't stop you from making sure I'd never see him again." Lucas took a breath. "I know." The simplicity of it, 2 words carrying no defense, no deflection, seemed to land on Ethan in a way that none of the prepared arguments would have. He had built his plan around a version of Lucas who would arrive posturing and negotiating and performing strength. This Lucas standing on a ridge in the gray morning, looking at his brother with something that was almost penitence, was not that version. "That's it," Ethan said. 10 years and that's what you've got. You know, what do you want me to say?" Lucas said. "Give me the words and I'll say them. I'll say all of them. But first I need you to let him come to me, please." That word, please, from a man who Grace strongly suspected did not use it often. Ethan's jaw worked. "You don't get to do that." "Do what?" Show up here being reasonable, being human. I built this whole thing around you being exactly who you always are, cold, calculated, untouchable. You don't get to be different now just because it helps you. I'm not being different, Lucas said. I'm just... He stopped, looked at Noah. Something moved through his face. I'm just scared. Okay, I'm scared in a way I haven't been scared since the night his mother died, and I can't be anything else right now. I can't perform. I've got nothing left to perform with. The ridge went quiet. Grace felt Noah's shoulders shift under her hand, the beginning of a movement toward his father. Instinctive and unstoppable, and she pressed very gently, just enough to say, not yet. He stilled. Ethan was staring at Lucas with an expression Grace could not fully read. It was the expression of a man whose plan had been built on a foundation of certainty, the certainty that Lucas was a specific kind of person and who was now watching that foundation crack under the weight of something more complicated than the story he had been telling himself. You cut me out, Ethan said. Quieter now, the performance leaving his voice and something rawer taking its place. Not just from the business, from everything, from his life. He meant Noah. He's my blood too. I know, Lucas said again. Stop saying that. Then tell me what to say, Ethan. Tell me what would actually help. Because I will stand here and I will listen to everything and all of it, every single thing you have been carrying. But I need Noah out of it first. He's 8 years old, son. Whatever is between us. He didn't make it. A silence. He looks like her, Ethan said suddenly, out of nowhere, his voice completely stripped down. You know that he looks exactly like Sarah, around the eyes. Something happened to Lucas's face that Grace looked away from because it was too private for a stranger to witness. I know, Lucas said, a third time. But different now, not concession, just grief shared and acknowledged across 20 feet of open ridge. Ethan's grip on Noah's arm changed. Grace felt it before she saw it, the quality of hold shifting from control to something that had no tactical purpose at all. Something that was just contact. Just an uncle's hand on a nephew's arm, remembering what that meant. He still has the fox, Ethan said, almost to himself. Uncle Ethan gave it to me, Noah said quietly, when I was 4. I still sleep with it. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Ethan released Noah's arm. It was not a dramatic gesture. He didn't step back or make a declaration. His hands simply opened. Uncurled. Let go. The way hands do when the thing you've been holding has become heavier than the reason you picked it up. Grace moved. She moved before anyone else in the situation had processed that the grip had changed. Because in emergency medicine, you learn to act in the window between the crisis and the response to the crisis, which is always brief and never guaranteed. She took Noah by both shoulders, turned him gently, but completely away from Ethan and toward his father, and said directly into his ear, "Go." Noah ran 20 feet across the ridge into Lucas Callahan's arms with a force that staggered the man backward half a step, and Lucas caught him and went down on one knee on the rough ground and wrapped both arms around his son and held on with the particular intensity of someone who almost lost something they cannot calculate the value of and is now in the process of recalibrating everything. Grace turned back to Ethan. He was watching them. His face was she searched for the word and found only this: finished, not defeated, not broken, finished. The face of a man at the end of something that has taken everything he had, looking at the result and beginning the slow, painful process of understanding what the result actually is. She heard movement on the path below. Lucas's people, because of course there were people, of course. He had not come entirely alone because men like Lucas Callahan are not built to come alone, even when they tried coming up the ridge, now that the situation had visibly changed. Ethan, Grace said. He looked at her. Don't run, she said. Don't make this worse than it has to be. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at his hands. Then he sat down on a flat rock at the edge of the ridge, and he put his elbows on his knees and he waited. That was all. He just waited, the knife on his belt, unused. The rage that had powered 3 days of planning and execution sitting quiet inside him spent the fire out. What remained, just a man on a rock at dawn on a Tennessee mountain, waiting for the consequences of a decade of decisions to finish arriving. 2 of Lucas's men came over the ridge. Grace held up one hand, flat, clear, clinical. He's not resisting, she said. He's sitting down. Don't escalate this. The men looked at Lucas. Lucas, still on one knee with Noah in his arms, looked up and gave a single nod. The men stopped where they were. Grace sat down on the ground next to Ethan. Not close, not intimate, just in proximity. The way she sat with patients who were past the emergency part and into the aftermath part, which was always its own kind of emergency. You need anything, she said. Ethan looked at her sideways. You're asking me if I need anything. I'm a nurse, it's a reflex. A silence, then unexpectedly Ethan said, Is she going to be okay, Sarah? His mother. He stopped, shook his head. I know she died, I know that, He stopped again. Grace understood. The mind does strange things at the end of adrenaline, reaches for things it knows are gone, tries to find a version of the story with a different ending. I'm sorry about Noah's mother, Grace said quietly. She was the best thing about that family, Ethan said, including me. A pause. Especially me. Grace did not fill the silence. She had learned in 14 years of emergency medicine that some silences were not holes to be filled, but wait to be witnessed. Across the ridge, Lucas was talking to Noah. She could not hear the words. She could hear the tone, low, continuous, the voice of a father doing inventory, checking every part of his child for damage, physical and otherwise. She could see Noah responding, nodding. At one point, reaching into his pajama top and showing his father the fox, and Lucas looking at it with an expression that told Grace the fox had a history longer and more complicated than she knew. Marcus arrived over the ridge 10 minutes later, coming up fast, eyes moving over the scene with the rapid professional assessment of a man whose entire job is threat evaluation. He saw Ethan on the rock. He saw Grace beside him. He saw Lucas and Noah. He slowed down. Boss, he said, low. We're fine, Lucas said without looking up. I've got a medical team at the base of the trail. Lucas looked at Grace for the first time directly. Not past her, not around her. At her. The look of a man who is seeing someone clearly for the first time and adjusting everything in his head accordingly. Are you hurt? He said. I'm cold, Grace said, and I need to eat something real before I fall over. But I'm intact. Noah needs to be checked. I know, his wrist needs imaging. There may be soft tissue damage from where he was grabbed. He's mildly hypothermic, mild to moderate dehydration. He needs food warmth and a doctor who isn't also exhausted. She paused. No serious injuries that I can assess without equipment. Lucas stared at her. You've been with him since the beginning, he said. Since about 40 minutes after Ethan took him. Yes. You stayed under that cabin. Yes. For 3 days. 2.5, Grace said, give or take. Lucas looked at her with the expression of a man who has run out of the appropriate category for what he is encountering. His whole life, people had done things for him because of what he could offer in return. Power, money, protection. The transactional architecture of his world was so total that he had stopped consciously noticing it the way fish stop noticing water. Grace Holloway did not fit the architecture. She had followed a stranger's child into the dark with no phone signal and no backup in a nurse's bag, and she had stayed for 2.5 days in the cold because she made a promise to an 8-year-old, and she was sitting on the ground next to the man who had put that child in danger, asking if he needed anything because she was a nurse, and that was a reflex. Why, Lucas said, not rhetorically. He actually wanted to know. Grace thought about it honestly. Because he was cold and scared and alone, she said. And I could help. And if I didn't, I'd have to live with that. And I've found that the things you don't do are harder to live with than the things you do. Lucas was quiet for a long time. Noah had fallen asleep against his father's shoulder. Just like that, the way children do when safety finally arrives and the body, which has been running on emergency reserves for days, simply surrenders to the backlog of exhaustion all at once. His hand was still loosely wrapped around the stuffed fox. His one shoe, his one sock, his face completely slack and peaceful, the way children's faces go in sleep, as if the daytime version is a performance, and this is the real one. Lucas held him and did not move. Marcus had Ethan in hand, not roughly, but with the certainty of someone who understood the situation was not over just because the immediate danger had passed. Ethan went without resistance. He looked once at Noah, asleep against Lucas's shoulder. Something crossed his face, lost, Grace thought. Not regret exactly. Something older than regret. Grief for a version of the family that had existed once and was never going to exist again. Then he looked away. Grace watched him go. She sat on the ground on a Tennessee mountain ridge in the early morning, and she felt all at once everything she had been suppressing for 2.5 days arrive simultaneously. The exhaustion, the cold, the hunger, the fear she had refused to feel in real time because feeling it would have made her less useful. It came through her like a wave, complete and undeniable, and she let it come because there was nothing left to save it for. She put her face in her hands. She did not cry. She did not have enough left for crying. She just breathed in and out, and let the wave move through her and recede. Then she felt a hand on her shoulder. She looked up. Lucas Callahan was standing over her, Noah still held against his other shoulder asleep. His face was different from the face he had come up the ridge with. Not softer exactly. Cleared, the way air clears after a storm that has finally broken. "Can you stand?" he said. "Give me a second," she said. He gave her a second. Then he extended his free hand. She took it, and he helped her up with the careful, unhurried attention of a man who has decided in the last 10 minutes to slow down. She stood on the ridge in the morning light, legs unsteady, shoulder aching, 26 hours without sleep and counting, with the thermal blanket still around her shoulders and mud on her hands and her nurse's bag hanging off one arm. "I need to get to my mother," she said. "She's been waiting on her medicine since Tuesday night." Lucas almost laughed. Almost. It was the sound of a man rediscovering the function. "Marcus will drive you," he said. "I can drive myself." "Your car has been on the side of a mountain road for 2.5 days, he said. "Let Marcus drive you." Grace considered arguing. She decided she did not have the reserves for it. "'Kay," she said. They started down the ridge together, Lucas carrying his sleeping son, Grace, walking beside them, the morning coming up full and cold and clear over the Smokies. Below them, the access road was visible. The black vehicles, the medical team setting up the ordered, controlled response of a powerful man's resources, arriving after the fact, after the crisis had already been resolved by a woman in scrubs with a nurse's bag and a promise. Halfway down the trail, Noah stirred. He lifted his head from his father's shoulder, looked around disoriented, saw the trees, felt his father's arms, started to reorient. Then he saw Grace walking beside them. His face did the thing children's faces do when they see the person they needed most in their worst moment, a complete, unguarded recognition that has nothing performed about it. "You're still here," he said, sleepy, wondering. "I told you I wouldn't leave," Grace said. He looked at her for a moment with those eyes that Ethan had said looked like his mother's. Then he reached out from his father's arms across the space between them, and he grabbed her hand. Small fingers around hers, cold and certain. He held on for the rest of the way down the mountain. She let him. 3 weeks later, Grace was finishing a Tuesday night shift, 11 hours instead of 14, which felt like a gift when she found Lucas Callahan sitting in the ER waiting room. Not surrounded by people, not performing anything, just sitting in a plastic chair with a paper coffee cup in both hands like any other person who was waiting for something. She stopped in front of him. "You could have called," she said. "I didn't have your number," he said. "I had your hospital." "How's Noah?" "Good." A pause. "Better than good. He's been asking to go camping." A brief, complicated expression. "I think he's trying to tell me something about outdoor skills." Grace almost smiled. "He earned them." "He talks about you," Lucas said. "Every day. He talks about you every day." She didn't answer that. "I want to do something for you," Lucas said. "I know you're going to tell me you don't want anything. I've been told that's your likely response by everyone I've talked to who has spent 5 minutes with you. You talk to people about me. I'm a thorough person." Grace sat down in the plastic chair next to him. She was tired in the clean, simple way she liked, the tiredness of work done, not the tiredness of fear sustained. "My mother needs a home nurse," she said. 3 days a week. It's expensive, and I've been managing it myself between shifts, and she stopped. "It's a lot." Lucas nodded once. "Done." "I'm not finished." He waited. "There's a kid who comes into this ER every few weeks," she said. 8 years old. Different situation than Noah. No father in the picture. Mother working 3 jobs. He comes in because nobody notices when he's sick until he's very sick. He needs a consistent pediatrician, and the family can't afford the gap in insurance. Lucas was very still. I'm not running a charity, Grace said. I'm asking you to solve a specific problem for a specific child. Can you do that? Yes, Lucas said. Okay. She stood up. Then we're square. Lucas looked up at her. That's it. That's what you want. I want my mother taken care of, and I want that kid to have a doctor. That's what I want. He stood as well. He was taller than she had processed on the mountain, or maybe it was just that on the mountain she had been too focused on keeping everyone alive to notice anything that wasn't immediately relevant. You know what I told Marcus after that morning on the ridge, he said. What? I told him I had spent 20 years building everything I built because I believed that power was the only thing that could protect the people I loved. He paused, and then I watched an ER nurse with a medical bag and no sleep hold my son together for 2.5 days through a crack in a floorboard. And I thought maybe I've been building the wrong things. Grace looked at him for a long moment. You've been building the right things, she said. You just forgot what they were for. He was quiet. Go home to your son, she said. Take him camping. Learn his teacher's name. She picked up her bag. And Lucas. He looked at her. Call Ethan. Not to forgive him, not yet. Maybe not for a long time. But call him, because whatever he did, you both lost Sarah, and you've both been drowning in that separately for 8 years. She paused. Noah still sleeps with the fox his uncle gave him. That means something. Don't bury it. Lucas Callahan stood in a hospital corridor in the fluorescent light with a paper cup of terrible coffee and looked at Grace Holloway with the expression of a man who had just been handed the most important instruction of his life by someone who had absolutely no obligation to give it to him. Okay, he said quietly. Just that. She walked out of the ER into the cool night air. Her car was in the second row of the parking lot. Her mother's medicine was on the passenger seat. She'd picked it up on the way in. The drive home was 11 miles. The gas tank was full. Her phone had 83% battery. Everything ordinary, everything intact. She sat in the car for a moment before starting it. She thought about Noah asleep against his father's shoulder coming down the mountain, one hand still holding the worn fox. She thought about Ethan sitting on a rock at the edge of a ridge, hands open, the fight finally gone out of him. She thought about her father's voice in the dark mountain woods, teaching her things she had spent 20 years not being grateful for, and was now. She thought about a crack in a floorboard, and a whispered name, and an 8-year-old boy who said, I can do that. Then she started the car and drove home, because there was still her mother's bandage to change. Still a Tuesday night. Still an ordinary life waiting to be returned to, intact and undiminished on the other side of a story that would settle into her, the way the most important things always do, quietly, permanently, and without needing to announce themselves to anyone. Grace Holloway had driven past 100 dark roads in her life. This one time she stopped. That was enough. That was everything. That was exactly who she had always been. She had just needed the dark and the cold, and a child's voice through a crack in the floor to remember it.